You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 137 for May 23rd, 2018. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about recording archaeological presentations at conferences and the issues and ethics that go along with it. So go get your conference papers ready because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today is Doug in Scotland.
Hello.
Sonia in Utah.
Hello.
And Stephen in Calgary.
Hi.
All right, so as we mentioned in the last episode, I think we did mention this anyway, we were going to talk about recording archaeology and digital ethics. And I actually have a really long, not really long, but a really good episode on the Archaeotech podcast, and I'll link to that in the show notes regarding virtual and digital ethics. Paul Zimmerman and I spent the entire episode talking about that. And that was a response to the SAA forum that I did on the last day of the SAAs in Washington, D.C. this last April. But one of the things we were talking about, and I think Bill White, who couldn't make it today because we're actually recording on Mother's Day, and he has, kids and a mom and a wife, so they've got things to do. But anyway, so we were talking about this, and he wrote a blog post about it, but we're talking about recording archaeology and digital ethics. And recording archaeology is actually the name, if you haven't subscribed, and I'll link to this in the show notes as well. If you haven't subscribed to Doug Rocks-Macqueen's YouTube channel called Recording Archaeology, go check it out because there are, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but I think there are thousands of videos on there of conference presentations. And you guys always do such a great job. You're always... not always, but most of the time I've seen, you'll have video of the presenter. So you'll set up a camera in the room and then also doing a screen record of their slide presentation and then mesh all that together and have a really great kind of split screen kind of thing of their slide presentation and of their actual them presenting. So I think that's really great. I love it. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is really why we haven't seen that here in this country, because Doug and his efforts, you're really hitting a lot of the conferences in the UKs. It doesn't seem to be an issue, although we'll talk about that and see what kind of challenges you've had in setting that up and getting that going and how you've worked on that. But I have approached several of the organizations here in this country, and everybody seems a little apprehensive about it. And I'm talking about just audio, because I told him, I said, listen, I can edit out any sort of thing. Like, I've never heard somebody in a conference presentation actually list the coordinates of a site, like the UTMs or the lat long of a site. Like, I've never heard anybody do that. They might be displayed on a screen somewhere or on a map where you could find it, but I'm just recording audio. So Doug's recording video as well. And I wonder in this country if recording the screen presentation would be some confidentiality issues, especially with CRM projects that are presenting, because sometimes, most of the time that's proprietary information, not proprietary, but protected information, and should not get out there. So let's just start talking about this. And I want to get your guys' thoughts initially on, if you were at a conference and somebody wanted to record your presentation, would you say yes or no? And Sonia, I think I want to start with you because I'm currently in talks. Nothing is successful yet because we're just in preliminary conversations about this, but I'm preliminary talks to actually record some, if not all, of the Great Basin Anthropological Conference not lectures, but papers. And I mean, that's right in your back door. So I assume you're going to go to the GBACs this year.
Yes. Yes.
So if somebody said, Sonia, we're going to record your presentation and put it up on the internet for all to see, whether it's audio and or video, what's your initial reaction to that?
My initial reaction would be, okay, the first thing that I need to do is request permission from my client to make sure that they're cool with that. And if they are, then I have no objections to it. I'll probably be a little bit more sensitive to how I say things, or I may use less technical terminology and more familiar terms, because in general, I do that anyway. But if I know that it's going to go out to the public, I want the public to be able to understand it. So again, first thing I do is check with the agency or client or both and make sure it's okay with them, and then make my presentation easier to understand by the public. And in some cases, that could require a rewrite.
So if you knew ahead of time that it was going to be recorded, you would actually alter your presentation to suit that recording, to suit a wider audience.
Probably, yes. That doesn't mean that I would necessarily change the content of it. But if I received permission from my client and the agencies, I would probably modify my language.
Okay.
Simply to make it easier to understand.
Oh, indeed. Well, and that's a question. That's an interesting perspective, because I'd actually never heard that before, because we'd never really talked to anybody ahead of time. Most of the time when I've recorded presentations, I've just showed up, unless I was chairing it. Then I'll give the people ahead of time, I'll get their permission. I'll say, hey, I'm just going to plug in an audio recorder and record these presentations. And I don't know if anyone actually changed their presentation to fit possibly a wider audience, because I told them it was going to go up on the Archaeology Podcast Network and be heard by, tens of thousands of people potentially, and people who are not archaeologists. But I didn't get the sense from listening that they actually did change their presentations, but who knows? That is definitely something I hadn't considered before. Stephen, what about you? Would you be adverse to someone recording your presentation, either notifying you ahead of time or telling you 5 minutes before?
Yeah, well, and that's kind of the one of the considerations, right? Like Sonia was talking about, a lot of what we do, particularly in CRM, is collaborative work. If you show up 30 seconds before my talk and ask me if you can record it, I don't have time to talk to my collaborators, right? Like, these are people who are essentially stakeholders in my presentation, and they probably had to, in a lot of cases, when I've given papers, you send it out to the client or whoever has some sort of involvement, just to be like, okay, here's what I'm doing. I might tweak the wording a little bit, but this is the gist of it, and go from there. And the concept is not as a recording. The concept is, I'm going to present it to a professional audience.
Right.
So if all of a sudden you're like, well, we're going to record it, it's like, I can't say yes. Like it would be better if that was a part of the registration.
For sure.
Like I am,
consent to recording.
Yeah, exactly. And it has to be opt-in.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I'm filling out my abstract, would you consent to recording your paper? Click there. So that's one factor. The other factor, and we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, so I'm sure we're going to touch on it, is that my perspective of conference papers are that most are preliminary in nature. So I'm, I've done the work. I'm thinking about how to interpret it. It's basically like, here's some, I don't want to say initial findings, because, the findings are usually pretty well set at that point, but it's like an initial interpretation, or maybe even not. Maybe it's like, this is the direction I'm heading for my research. And, I'm kind of throwing it out there for a professional audience to get feedback, and see how that goes. And
right.
The problem with recording it then is that, this is like an unfinished product. And that's fine, if it's going out to the professional audience on a broader scale, right? Like if it goes out on Archaeo Twitter and all the archaeologists on Twitter are like, hey, you could try this or you could try that. That's great. But there needs to be a sunset clause, because eventually the finished product is going to come out. And if people are still looking at the unfinished product, they're going to get the wrong picture, the wrong story.
Right.
And so, and this is a big deal with technology in general, right? Is that, like there's a point where this stuff has to end. Or
yeah.
be archived in such a way that it's understood that it's deprecated.
Before we throw this over to Doug, who's got a lot of experience with this, I'll just make a couple comments on what both you, Stephen, and Sonia brought up, because it's really, really interesting to me when you include a medium such as audio or video recording, people's attitudes toward this whole thing change. Because one thing I've definitely noticed, especially in the era of Twitter and live tweeting conferences, is nobody asks permission to tweet out comments and quotes or even pictures of slides from conference presentations, and nobody seems to care either. Like, nobody seems to mind that. I'm sure it's happened occasionally, but I've never seen it personally. Somebody saying, "Hey, could you take that tweet down? It's of a slide that I didn't want up there." But there's no warnings in the handbook or the program guide. There's no warnings ahead of time. There's nothing saying, "Hey, no flash photography," that kind of stuff. No.
But wasn't there? I mean, wasn't there a big thing on Twitter, like when people started live tweeting conference papers, about the etiquette of tweeting conference papers?
Sure, there might have been, but there's no real regulation.
No, but there's still etiquette, right? Like there are still ways of being polite, and one of the reasons why I don't live tweet is because I'm not going up and asking them if I can tweet stuff. And I'll do title slide because I figure that's fair game, but I'm not going to interpret what some people are saying. I mean, a lot of times I'm using it as like side channel crosstalk anyway, like commenting.
Right. Right.
But there was a point where it was a very big deal about, how to behave at conferences. But yeah, I haven't seen much in more recent times. And so, the question is, like, are more people just okay with it or just resigned to it? Or are the people who have dealt with it as an ethical issue continuing to do so? And the people who aren't on Twitter just aren't even aware it's there.
I think that's more likely the case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's probably, multiple perspectives on that. Oh, well, I want to kind of step back to something that Sonia said, though. When she was talking, like she would change the wording to be more public.
Right.
I would not change my language, because that's the intended audience. And if you're recording, me talking, that audience isn't necessarily going to change, although the scope might be broader. Like, I'm not turning it into a public archaeology paper if it's actually like a methods paper aimed at professionals.
Right.
Like that. I don't consider that. I don't even consider conference papers part of the ethics of involving the public, because it's not. It's 90% of the time, professional audience. If I'm giving a talk at the local society and general populations, open to the public, come and find out what archaeologists are doing, then yeah, it's public archaeology talk. But I don't consider conferences inherently as a public archaeology thing. Yeah,
that was my final comment I was going to make before we get this to Doug is the concept of privacy at a conference in general, because just about anybody can go to just about any conference. There are some restrictions, but if you pay the money, they'll give you a ticket to go to the conference. But that being said, most people, if they're not in the professional sector, they don't go. But like I said, there's very little regulation. You often don't know every single person in the audience when you're giving a paper. So your expectation of privacy or confidentiality or some sort of exclusivity for the people who are there is kind of not there, honestly. And then the other thing is I've encountered resistance with people doing exactly what you said, Stephen, presenting at like Heritage Society monthly meetings and things like that. It's like, none of the people here are archaeologists, right? Like, none of the people here are professionals. They're all just interested in the subject and they've come to hear you speak. And yet for some reason, an audience of 20 is better than an audience of 20,000, in regards to recording it and putting it out there. I don't know. It's a really interesting thing, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. We've only got about 3 minutes left in this segment, but I'm going to throw it to Doug because he has been typing so many comments in the, in the thing, just ready to talk. So, Doug, I don't know where we start on this, but I think I'm just going to throw it to you with a question before we really get to addressing to some of those comments, because I want your take on how you got started in this. What was some of the early resistance that you met in setting all this stuff up and getting to where you are now?
Actually, so I realize we're coming up on a break, so that might be something I can pick up on the other side of the break. Sure. I know Sonia has a comment, and maybe we go to Sonia for that last comment to finish out the section, and then I can jump into that, because that's quite in-depth discussion right there. Like, so much resistance.
Yeah, I want to follow up on something said a little bit earlier about my changing of language. Mm-hmm. This doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to change all the language in a presentation. It would be something more like we're talking about lagomorphs, for example, mm-hmm. and usually in a technical meeting we would say lagomorph, 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 lagomorph over and over and over again. People. Professionals or people who are zooarchaeologists would say, oh, okay, he's talking about hares or rabbits. But right. if we're going to present this to the public, every now and again, I might come back to it and say a lagomorph is a rabbit of some sort, or a hydric soil is a wetland type mm-hmm. soil. You know, I'm not talking about changing the professionalism of the presentation. I'm talking about changing or defining things a little bit more often, so that if the public is listening, that we should we want to educate them. I mean, that's the point of public education in archaeology. If we keep saying lagomorph, lagomorph, hydric soil, you know, oxidized, you know, using all this technical jargon, and we don't define it mm-hmm. every now and again, especially for the public, especially if we know the presentation is going to the public, we're starting to talk over their heads, and that tends to turn people off, and we want people to be interested. So that's more of what I was explaining or trying to say. I would be more conscious of modifying my presentation that way. The other comment that I wanted to make was regarding the presentation is often in draft, and I can definitely get behind why somebody wouldn't want their presentation put out to the public for comment, because it's still in draft. You want to make sure things are right. This is slightly related. When I was working on my master's thesis, I had felt like I had done comprehensive research, and I couldn't find some information that I needed. So I posted, this was back in the 90s, so we were still on forums and instead of chat rooms. But I posted a request for information, and I got my hindquarters chewed off by someone who is still a professional archaeologist for not doing my research. And I'm like, I have done the research. Where is this coming from? You know, I all of a sudden I'm getting attacked because they've perceived me as not doing my research when I have done it. I've exhausted it, and now I'm reaching into people who might have other information. So when you put something out into the public generally or frequently will take things as gospel, and we have to be very careful about that.
Okay, that's well said. # fake news. Okay. Doug, take us out of this segment.
Okay, yeah, I would actually just add to that to say we should probably look at changing our wording, not so much for the public, but for other archaeologists. So I just learned about 2 minutes ago what a lagomorph was, but it is one of the things that archaeology covers such a wide range of subjects that you can't be an expert in all of it, but you kind of want to dabble, and so you want to know what's happening with lipids, and you want to know what's going on with GIS, so that maybe if you have a project, you'll have a rough idea of what that sort of work can do. But honestly, most of our work is so highly specialized that it's not just that the public can't understand it. I would say probably 95% of most archaeologists don't understand other archaeologists and what they're talking about, because we use such highly specialized language. And there's a time and a place for that. And I understand that, certain language actually helps when you're talking to other people, and it makes it go faster, and it helps with certain levels of communication. But I am actually kind of the view that most of what we do when we give presentations aren't quite understandable to a lot of our peers, which I find to be a problem. So possibly something. Sorry, it's a bit of a negative note to end on this segment, but yeah,
it's another good point. So, I'm sure we'll get into some of that in the next segment. So let's take our first break and come back on the other side. In the meantime, check out these words from our sponsors. We do have a couple of them, so check that out, and we'll be back in a second. Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, British Columbia, has launched a professional online master's program built by and for cultural heritage management practitioners. The thesis-based MA or coursework-only graduate certificate both offer integrated study of HRM's ethical, legal, business, and research priorities. The MA thesis requirements comply with Register of Professional Archaeologists and other jurisdictional standards. This is the perfect graduate program for bachelor-level CRM practitioners ready to make a career commitment, but not ready to relocate or quit their job. We have advertised for SFU in the past, and we had a long podcast about SFU's program, and I highly recommend it. If you're looking to get a graduate degree in cultural resource management, this is the way to go. Apply today at www.sfu.ca/archaeology. That's www.sfu.ca/archaeology to take your career to new levels today. Hey, podcast fans and digital archaeologists. Have you heard about WildNote? It's a data collection app that works online or offline on your smartphone or tablet, iOS or Android. It allows you to collect field data easily, manage data efficiently, and generate data reports and site records effortlessly. We have a growing list of state site forms built in for your use, and some generic forms that will work anywhere. Check out the shovel testing and photograph forms. You can get a free all-access 30-day trial today by going to wildnoteapp.com. That's wildnoteapp.com for your free 30-day trial. Now back to the show. Okay, we're back with the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 137, and we are talking about recording archaeology, specifically right now, recording archaeology presentations at conferences and such. And we've gone back and forth with all of our opinions and some comments on how we would do this, why we do this, and some other concerns that we might have. But Doug is well-versed and experienced in doing this, and probably the most experienced archaeologist in the world, I would almost venture to say, in recording archaeological presentations. And if he's not, then the other people aren't promoting themselves as well. Because if you look at anything that's been recorded lately, it's probably on Doug's channel, and that's where we'll go. So Doug, we started off before Sonia got into her comment last time, asking you about a lot of the resistance and starts and stops you had while getting this thing going, and really establishing yourself as somebody who can do this and is trustworthy and things like that. Why don't you start by just getting into that process and what it was like and what you had to go through?
Yeah, it's been sort of organic, and so I guess you could say I've made enough mistakes to kind of figure out how the best way to do it is. And so actually, I'll take it back to a comment. I think it was Stephen who said opt in versus opt out. And so when I do conferences, we actually work on an opt out sort of system, and we give people advance notice, though lots of people ignore their email. So there's always kind of a surprise of like at the day when people walk up and they're like there's a camera, and I was like, yes, we sent you an email, several of them. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I didn't read them. That happens a lot. But what we do is opt out, because it's a bit like organ donation. You get a lot more people if it's opt out than opt in. We also, when we do our recordings, you have like usually 2 or 3 stages to opt out. So we send an email around asking people to opt out, and some do. At the day of, they can opt out, so they can just say, hey, please don't record, and we just turn everything off. And then we send a copy of the presentations to people afterwards, and then they can either opt out or they can ask for edits. And so we do get a fair, maybe about 10% of presentations, there's a bit of an editing. So someone would be like, actually, this slide so-and-so is, I messed up. The arrow was supposed to go somewhere else. Can you put this different slide in? And we do that. Or they'll be like, can you cut out minutes 12 through 14 where I called that other archaeologist an asshole? And we do that. But it's actually not that, it doesn't happen that often. And I'd have to say most of the time people are way overcautious. So they'll ask me to cut out parts that I'm like, I don't see where someone could get offended by that, but that's a good part. So we always do that sort of opt-out way of doing it, just because it's a lot simpler, and it's really hard to get archaeologists, especially at conferences and a lot of different things going on, to opt in. Most people just don't actually read enough of their, like if you put it into the form to sign up for the conference, most of them won't do it. Most people don't read that well close enough to actually know what they're opting into or not. So that's sort of one thing we do.
You have that in the form for conferences right now? Like, have you guys been doing that recently?
Yeah, especially for a lot of the smaller conferences, it'll say this will be recorded by so and so. If you need to opt out, we'll contact you anyways. Okay. So we do that, but this has also been a process that's been going on for 6-7 years, 2011, 2012. Okay. And so the reason it's grown is a lot of it's referrals. So I'll do one conference and it makes people feel comfortable about it. And then they'll be willing to have their conference recorded. So it is a bit of a flywheel where you build up enough momentum until it eventually goes. But also part of it is the approach. I know, Chris, you'd said that it's not a big thing in North America, but actually there's it's hit or miss on the areas. So Archaeology Southwest, I think they're in Tucson. They put up most of their talks online. The Oriental Institute in Chicago puts up all their talks, all their conferences online. And then I apologize right now. I'm probably going to butcher it. I think it's Azor. Is it something like, it's the Middle Eastern archaeology society of some sort, and I can't remember what it stands for. Association of something. Right. And they do all their conferences online on YouTube channels as well. Okay. So there's actually quite a few people that do it, different organizations. It just depends what your topic is, I guess you could say. And so, you could completely miss it, but there is a lot happening in North America with lots of people recording, and it's more people are recording as well. And I realize I'm kind of talking on, so I'll try to move on to some of the comments I had. The one thing is back to what you guys have been talking about, public versus private and stuff. We're very clear that these presentations are conference presentations and that they're meant to be aimed at a specific audience. And I think it is all about the audience you want to go for. And it's up to the individual speaker, but I wouldn't try to tell people because it's recording, try to aim for a public audience, because it is really very different presentations, almost so different that I'm not sure if, there's enough overlap that you could do both, like a highly technical one and a presentation for the public. They're two different audiences, two different ways of talking, different ways of communicating. I don't know if I'd do that. And then just a comment on tweeting and stuff. It was a really big deal. I think it's a bigger deal over here because you have Lorna Richardson, who's done a lot of stuff on ethics. Right. But there's a lot of conferences over here in Europe that will have ways for people to opt out. So the CAA, which is the Computer and Analytical Archaeology Conference, which is now an organization, we recently put together a conference ethics. And part of that, we put opt out. So if people don't want their presentation to be tweeted, it's now an opt out, which is a lot easier. And it's logistical reasons, because if you had every speaker have to opt in and say, oh, you could tweet, again, most of them are going to forget. So we've gone for the opt out because it's just easier. But there are people who will say, please, these are sensitive slides. I can't show them outside this room. Don't tweet pictures.
Right.
So, I mean, have you guys run into that in any of your conferences where people have they actually put together any sort of like how to do social media or anything in any of the conferences you guys have been to?
I've personally only seen informal stuff, people putting out at the beginning of a big conference, like a couple tweets saying, hey, this is a great format to tweet your things in. Like I know a few years ago at the SAs, they started putting down the session number versus starting with like the person's full name and title and all that stuff. Because you only had so many characters. But other than that, I've never heard anything that was blatantly official, like just that everybody was aware of. Maybe there was some fine print somewhere that nobody read, like you said, Doug. But I've never seen anything.
So some people tweeted things on Twitter for conferences that I wasn't attending. So I'm kind of drawn a blank as to which ones they were. Might have been AAAs or the CAAs, the computing one, where they had kind of points about tweeting, and they included what types of hashtags to use and stuff like that. But I'm not sure that I've seen that sort of thing recently, and part of that might just be my Twitter use is a lot more sporadic now.
There's still no enforcement of it, though. Like if a conference really wanted to hit this hard, they would have somebody in their social media group, because they all have some sort of social media coordinator for their own social media or something like that, like monitoring the conference hashtags and then contacting people if they put something up that was either flagged by another attendee or just seemed inappropriate. They could DM them and say, hey, could you take this down or change it? But I haven't seen anybody, even if they're doing that, they're not overt about it, or I've never tweeted anything that got me flagged. I'm not really sure. So
your name's on a list somewhere. Don't worry.
I'm sure it's on lots of lists. Doug, before we get too much farther, I want to address one big elephant in the room as far as recording goes. This stuff isn't cheap. You have some pretty sophisticated gear for doing this. You've got software for recording the screens. It takes a lot of time to put these presentations together, especially since you're doing video. And you don't need to talk about your prices or cost or anything like that. We don't need to put numbers out there, but could cost be a factor for some of these conferences? Like, are they, I guess the biggest question is, are they paying for having this done? And my first instinct would be probably not, if it's going on not their YouTube channel, it's going on the YouTube channel that you coordinate. But how does that work from a cost standpoint? If you're taking the information and putting it on Recording Archaeology YouTube channel, do they pay to have this done? Or would they only pay if they wanted it behind their, paywall or on their website?
Okay, the answer to that is complicated.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah, it really depends. So some of like the really tiny regional ones, I just do for free, and they might pay for like a train ticket.
Oh yeah.
Actually kind of smaller ones are better, because what they'll do is they'll get funders, and then they'll actually pay for my time. So occasionally I actually get paid like a day rate of what it would actually cost me to do this.
Nice.
Most of the time it's not. Most of the time I'm doing this volunteer, and they may be covering costs. It's actually been quite a struggle to get conferences to even cover, volunteer costs. And that's been a process. So I'll start with a conference, and maybe I'll offer to do stuff for free and be like, oh, I'm going to be at the conference anyways. I've gotten my travel covered from a grant or a project or something like that. And I'll be like, well, I'm here. I can record a session or two. And then after they kind of see that, then they're more comfortable with it. So I've done that. Big ones over here is TAG, but even the EAA, so the European Association of Archaeologists, was the European Archaeologist Association. I can't remember which A is which A. You were there for Chris. So Glasgow.
Yeah.
Glasgow, I did all on my own. That was all volunteer. But since then, EAA has now paid for costs, and they've actually put in a lot of money this last time to help with equipment costs as well. So one of the things is I try to get some sort of payment, not so much as it pays for my time, but it just, there's equipment that needs to be bought.
Sure.
So it's all variable, and I'll get back to the point of it's actually not that expensive.
Okay.
it's a bit time consuming. So you have to think about people's costs in that way. So it can be expensive there, but a sense, the screen recording, it's open source. It's open OBS, open broadcast system. It's what people use for like Twitch and YouTube when they're doing gaming. It's actually meant for gaming, but you can do screen captures. There's a free software, DaVinci I use. There's 2 tiers, like a free one, and then you can pay a little extra, get some extra parts. But it's quite brilliant. If not, there's Shotcut, which is a completely open source version. So that's the editing. And really right there, you're looking at free. So actually everyone, if you had a decent enough microphone, which some computers do, possibly you might be looking at costs with microphones. You could just do slides and audio, and you put it in there, you hit record, everything goes through, a little chopping at the beginning, at the end. It's quite quick, and anyone can do it. So there's no reason that any conference pretty much anywhere could not do it from a technical standpoint. There might be a little cost in like a microphone, but you're talking like maybe to get a halfway decent one, $100. You could do it per session. That's still not a cost that's small, but it's manageable. So it's actually quite easy to do if you want to do it like that. And that's actually what some of the bigger conferences we're doing recently is. It's just going to be slides and audio because I just can't spend 100 days of the year video editing because it's just too time consuming. But if I don't have to put like a shot of the person in there, it cuts down my editing time by so much. And then you can edit audio. So Audacity, what we've used for podcasts in the past to edit, you can use all that software. There's lots of tutorials. Anyone can do this for pretty much almost no cost if you wanted to, or a very minimal cost.
Indeed. What about the ethics behind, say, the YouTube monetization? It's, they'll do that whether you get the money or not. YouTube will put ads on it.
No, you can turn off.
You can shut that off? Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't run any ads on any of the videos. And there's what we don't want to bore all our listeners with. There's reasons to have to do with copyright. And so basically, if you put anything on YouTube, copyright's fun in the digital world because let's say your server's based in like the United States, but the company's registered in the UK, but the copyright infringement happened in Germany. Whose laws do you follow?
Right.
And that gets quite expensive. But usually the laws, if you're putting something on YouTube, it's probably going to come under US copyright laws. And so some people will include images that they don't own the copyright to in their presentations. And I use fair use, which is a part of copyright says that, if it's for a legitimate reason, learning is one of them. And you're not like, so if it's just a small part, like if someone completely ripped off a paper and like did word for word, read out a paper that's already been published and like on the big publishers, that would be copyright infringement. But if they take one image and use it in their presentation, it's minimal. It's not going to cost the actual publisher. Like no one's going to be able to not replicate that paper by that one image. It's minor, but one of the other parts of that is if you're making money or not. So I turn off all the ads. And so I make no money from advertisement, just so I avoid that issue of copyright, though I've never been sued yet. And there's, thousands of videos I've put up. Occasionally I get copyright notices through YouTube, which has to do not with any images ever, but occasionally someone puts music in their, like a video, they'll play a video in their presentation. I capture the music and they'll get a notice from YouTube. This is claimed by Sony. And I basically go back and I say, oh, it's fair use, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay. And then that's it. But with that, they'd either get money if it was monetized, but since I don't monetize it, they get nothing anyways. It's really not a big deal.
Okay.
Yeah, but so there are a lot of things you do have to consider, like copyright infringement and stuff like that. when putting these up, but it's not that big of a deal.
Indeed. Okay, well, we are going to take our second break on that note, and we will be back in just a minute to wrap up this discussion about recording archaeology, and possibly we'll dive into a little bit of digital ethics, a little deeper anyway. Back in a second. Hey, podcast listeners. Do you find yourself wondering what the latest tablet or smartphone could do for your business? Wonder what GPS to pair with your device? Just trying to figure out how to go digital in the field without breaking the bank and or making a bad investment? Or did you find a technology company to work with but just aren't sure the questions you need to ask during the initial conversation? Well, you're not alone. There are literally thousands of tech combinations out there, and it can be really tough finding the right one for your business and your workflow. My name is Chris Webster, and I've been working in CRM since 2005, and I've been a tech enthusiast my entire life. I spend my time trying to figure out how to make archaeology more efficient both technologically and financially. No one is going to give you a big pile of money to do whatever you want with, so you have to make the most of what you have. The right gear can mean the difference between zero margins on that next project and an employee benefits package. That's where DigTech Concierge comes in. Let us be your technology guru. Whether you have just a few questions or want us on retainer 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, we're here to help. With years of experience, tens of thousands of acres of survey done completely digitally, and many, many people trained, DigTech is your tech BFF, just waiting to guide you through this process now and through the inevitable changes to come. Should you hold on to those tablets or upgrade? What about the new operating system? Will it crash your apps, or can you go ahead and do it? We know the answers and can guide you to a profitable year. Go to www.digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge to book a consultation or book us for the year. The yearly retainer includes unlimited calls and support and company training on software and gear. That's digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge. And concierge is CONCIERGE. To get going and go digital today. Call us before you make any decisions. We've been there before.
I'm Jessica Yaquinto, and I'm the host of the Heritage Voices podcast. Heritage Voices focuses on how CRM and heritage professionals, public employees, tribes, and descendant communities can best work together to protect their heritage through tribal consultation, collaborative ethnography, and indigenous archaeology. Now back to the show.
All right, welcome back to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 137 about recording archaeology. And this is the final segment. And Doug, you had another follow-up comment to some of the things we've already mentioned.
Yeah, it was about how we approach conference presentations. I think Stephen and Sonia have touched on this, but I would like to expand it a little bit, is that people should realize a conference presentation is a practice. It's almost like when you talk, you see like comedians and you read interviews of comedians, and they, before they go on like the Comedy Central or those big shows where they do their hour-long show, they go to a lot of smaller venues and bomb a lot. Mm-hmm. And basically it's a lot of practice. And that, I think, should be the view for pretty much most conferences. It's about getting the practice out there. And it's about, you're trying to get feedback in a safe environment and a place where people will be able to comment and stuff like that. I know that's not every conference, with some people at conferences viewing it as a life or death struggle and trying to prove the person giving a presentation wrong. But in general, it is about sort of getting feedback and practicing and sort of playing with your ideas. But I also think that's something we should consider more widely across archaeology, in that as soon as you've published that paper, and actually most likely by the time a paper is published in a peer-reviewed journal, it's already partially out of date or will be going out of date at some point. Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm not sure if we mentioned this earlier, or if it was mentioned just, in the chat in between the segments. But it's the idea that like we need to present the final product to the public. I think that's a horrible problem we run into with archaeology, in that we're trying to present ourselves as experts and that we know the story, when in fact we are experts, but we definitely don't know the ending to most stories. I think we're doing ourselves a great disservice because we're trying to tell the public, turn off your brain. This is how it is. Don't think about it. And then they don't think about stuff. And then they go to, because actually, let's be honest, archaeology. So my videos get some fairly nice views for what they are, conference videos, but 100,000 million views on like crazy conspiracy stuff. That's just, aliens built this and Templars are destroying the world. And this is archaeologists are part of the thing. And the public eats it up and they see this and we haven't told them be critical. And, it should be critical of us, but it should also be critical of all those other people. We should be training people in those skills to be able to see bullshit and understand bullshit from actual scientific process. And so I do think that this is my personal opinion. Maybe you guys have different views, that we should never present to the public as this is what it is. We should present to them the process and how we got there. If they disagree with us, that's great. If they think that we're right, that's great. And if they think we're wrong and completely go off, well, that's not much we can do about that. But our goal should not be sort of like tiny little bits of these are facts you should know. Our goal should be teaching people a process of how to think critically and how to understand the past. But that might just be me. What are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this back up because I was going to comment on Stephen mentioned something about this in the first segment about how what they're presenting might not be a finished product. And if that gets out there and then they do have a finished product, then there could be some conflict in there, some informational conflict. However, I think I agree with you, Doug, is that do we ever know the end of the story? Is it ever a finished product? This is a science. And I understand that what Stephen probably meant was, and I'll give you a chance to defend yourself here in a second. What you probably meant was, maybe what you're presenting at the conference turns into, a polished, peer-reviewed paper, but a conference presentation is not peer-reviewed typically. I mean, you might have somebody look at it, but it's not quote unquote peer-reviewed. And maybe there are some errors in it. Maybe there are some directions you decided to go differently when you actually publish that. A lot of people don't even publish their conference presentations. Maybe that's where it dies. But either way, we're never quite done. And that's my comment on that. I mean, we just did an interview with Sir Barry Cunliffe over in the UK he's got a new book out. He's actually got a second edition of a book out called The Ancient Celts from Oxford University Press. And this is a second edition of a book that he published over 20 years ago. And, that's a long time. But I mean, everybody recognizes that, they could go back and read the first edition and there is going to be some, I don't want to say incorrect information, but there might actually be some slightly incorrect information on there only because we didn't have as clear a picture as we do today. And we still don't say we have 100% clear picture of the ancient Celts as we do today. Obviously, there's always more to learn, but they learned enough in the last 20 years to go out and write a new edition to the book, update some information, add some information, probably delete some information, do whatever they had to do to update that book. So I think what you're saying, Doug, is totally right. We need to educate the public in critical thinking skills and let them know that science is not absolute, especially archaeology and our study of the past. It's an ever-changing medium, and we're constantly learning new things and updating our theories and updating what we know, and then presenting that. And when we present it, it should be a presentation of the most current understanding as we know it today. But tomorrow could be a completely different presentation. So that's my thoughts on that. Anybody else? Stephen?
Yeah, can I respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're absolutely right. Like I'm not saying that we shouldn't let our mistakes and stuff be out there. That it's obviously a changing process. The problem is that everybody's going to go to the one venue and not the next venue, and so using your first edition, second edition analogy, that, yeah, we can go to the library, we can still read the first edition. Some people probably will, but the publisher is not printing the first edition. That right. If you go to the source, you're like, oh, there's a second edition now. I'd better use that. And if you go to a catalog and stuff like that, a lot of times now with digital catalogs, it'll be like, there's a newer edition. And the problem is like if I give a paper and it goes on YouTube, Doug's YouTube channel, and then I continue my work and do more work and come up with, get killed by a reviewer too, and have to rework my work a whole lot, and then eventually get it published and stuff. That's a different stream. Like if people are going to Doug's YouTube channel, they're not necessarily seeing like, oh, this is deprecated. Unlike, the editions of books, or, if you think in terms of like software code or software, it's like you're using an old version. You're using, but it's all going through the same clearinghouse.
Except that's how journal articles work, though, in a sense. So sorry, a plug for another thing I'm working on is we're doing a thing called research frameworks, which is basically a list of research and questions and stuff like that. And it's updatable. And the idea is you could go to one place and be able to see what the newest article is you should be reading. But currently, it's not widespread. So, for the last 100 or 200 years, if you publish in a journal, there'd be an article, but stuff would change, and you'd have to know that there's been articles published 20, 30, 40, 100 years later that you need to look at. I think we're asking a lot of people, but we should always be asking of people to realize that when you see something, it may not be the most up to date, and that you need to take that next step to research it. I think it's a problem not just with videoing, but a problem with, you could do a blog post. I'm pretty sure if we were to go back to some of our earlier podcasts, we'd probably think like, oh no, that information's changed. We should update it and stuff like that. And I think it's a huge problem in trying to be able to connect to people what that update is. So like on the YouTube channels, I can put links and say, this is the newest version, or you should go read this paper because this is what this presentation eventually came into. But you still need someone to take that effort to go and click on that link. I think it's a massive problem across all of science that we haven't quite figured out a way to, not just archaeology, but physics or there's that whole thing about how a lot of those experiments that have been proven wrong still get cited in papers, and not because they're cited as in this was wrong. They still get cited as in this is right. I don't think we've quite figured out a system to fix that yet, though.
Well, I think, Doug, you already said it though. It's teaching people critical thinking skills and teaching them. That's one of the things that I think you learn. You hear this in bringing this back to CRM archaeology. You hear a lot of times people saying that don't have graduate degrees. They're like, oh, what do I need a graduate degree for? I can do archaeology just fine, but there are certain things you learn when you go get a graduate degree. And one of those is how to do research. Hopefully you learn that. One of those is how to do a really good literature search, how to really understand what you're looking at. And that's one of the things that we need to teach people is those critical thinking skills, because like you said, Doug, it's been a problem for hundreds of years, ever since we started printing stuff in journals. I could look at a journal from 1905 and find out that it's been updated 700 times since then, that particular topic. And I don't think we're ever going to get away from that. I mean, how many times have you guys seen articles on Facebook get put out and somebody says, oh my God, look at this. And then somebody 10 comments down is like, yeah, that was put out in 2016 and has already been debunked. It's just making its way around the internet again. We're just not teaching people enough of those skills. Stephen, I think you had your virtual hand raised for a second there.
Yeah. And now I'm actually going to say something completely different.
Nice.
Yeah, well, and it's not uncommon thinking about that especially at smaller conferences and stuff, new people or younger professionals will talk about a certain thing, and like that is directly related to the research, particularly in CRM, because we're so site specific that they're talking about like, well, we got this site and here are some methodological issues that we're noting. And this is really interesting, and we should pursue this. And a lot of the older professionals are sitting there, and it's like, well, this is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
And so in a sense that like ideally we have that ability to do, the follow-up research and stuff like that, and chase down, basically citations and look at citation indices and stuff like that. But that doesn't always happen for conference papers, right?
Right.
So I was just going to toss that out there.
And this is sort of a theme that's been running through this segment is I think so Bill's blog post is really positive about conference presentations, and I'm very positive about them because obviously I record them. I think it's worthwhile, but I think there's also a pretty good limit. And I'd like to speak a little bit about the limits in that it's a conference presentation. You'll probably easily, if you record it double, triple, quadruple, some of them get 100 times the amount of people that were in the room viewing them. But it's not going to be a TED Talk where you're going to get millions of views. Right. Also, it is, if YouTube suddenly shut down, they would all disappear. I'd like to make the comment that YouTube is not an archive. This is a thing from Bill's blog post. I'm sorry he's not here, so we can have a more in-depth discussion. But it's a resource, but it's a very fleeting resource. And in no way does putting your presentation online is a substitute for going through peer review and doing a peer-reviewed article or even like a full report. I mean, you're talking about a 15, 20-minute presentation that can't go into the level of detail that a full report, a CRM report will have, depending on what the project is, hundreds of pages of data and information that you can't get across. So I for any listeners out there, I think I really want to encourage you guys to definitely record your presentations, but realize that it's only a piece of what you do in a larger range of work, and it'll definitely help, but it's not going to be a substitute or replace other things that we do. We basically still need to do it all. This is just a nice way of actually mainly reaching a lot of your peers and having that conversations. And essentially, instead of being in that conference venue, that one session that it's you and the session organizers and the other presenters and like maybe one other person's friend, you now have the chance to reach 200, 300, 400 archaeologists to get them to see your work, which is huge. And I know, because I get comments on videos and I have to send them on to the people and stuff. I know people have started partnerships because of seeing someone's presentation online. It's really great for that. But this is not the end all be all to all our woes. It's just an extra thing we can do that I think is better than, better than the system we have. It's a way to improve it, especially when you're talking about conferences and our carbon footprint and how expensive it is. Like, the main reason I do this is for people who can't make it to the conference, one, because of, costs, or maybe, family commitments. Not everyone can take a couple of days off, get childcare, or if you're caring for like parents or, you have a relative who's sick, you can't leave the home. You have to be there. So, I know some of the people who watch my presentations basically never make it to conferences because they have other commitments that they'll never be able to make it. So it's a great way to reach people and actually be really inclusive of your fellow archaeologists. So after being a bit down on it, I still say you should definitely 100% do it. Just realize it's not our silver bullet for everything.
Right. I'll pretty much echo that and close with something I've mentioned before, but this is a timely time to mention it again. A few years ago with the Nevada Association of Archaeologists meeting, and again, I don't know what the order of the A's are. Is it Archaeological Association? Anyway, a few years ago, we were at a small town in Nevada, like we usually are, except for this year we're in Reno, but we were in Ely, Nevada, a really tiny town, hard to get to. I mean, it's 6 hours from Reno just to get to Ely, and you never even leave the state. So it's small. There were maybe 50 people at that conference, and all Nevada archaeologists. And I gave a presentation the Friday before on digital archaeology. So it wasn't just about Nevada. It wasn't even about Nevada at all. So it was applicable to a wider audience inherently. And I gave this presentation about digital archaeology, and I recorded it, and I edited it and put it up on the Archaeology Podcast Network, and then shared it to Facebook as well, because that all the APN podcasts go to our Facebook page. And then I shared it from the Facebook page out to some other groups all that evening. And then I gave a lightning talk the next day. They had a little session of lightning talks, and it was later in the afternoon. It was after lunch. It was a 3-minute lightning talk, and I pulled up-to-date statistics. And I had already had several hundred views on the website. I couldn't really judge download, like actual downloads and listens. But as far as just engagement and people seeing that I did something and having the ability to listen to it if they wanted to, there was over 1,500 people engaged with it on Facebook through the other groups. So like I said, I don't know if they listened to it or not, but they were aware of the fact that I did it and had the ability to listen. And that was less than 24 hours after I gave the talk. And like I said, there were 50 people in the room. And to your point, Doug, there might be 15 people in the room. And half the time you go to somebody's presentation because they're a friend of yours. And, if it's not talking about the Maya or, Clovis, then the room's probably not full. And if you want to reach a wider audience, that's one of the mandates I think we should all have is, just have it. One of our mandates is to get it out there and to have as many people hear what we're talking about as possible in most cases. So that's pretty much all we have time for. If you're a member of the Archaeology Podcast Network, I think we're going to have a short bonus segment on this that I'm going to talk with Doug about. So go check that out. If you're not a member, go to arcpodnet.com/members to become a member and check out some of the bonus content from our episodes. Otherwise, thank you, and we will be back next time. Go get your presentations recorded.
Chris, can I just add, if anyone listening wants to do this, please get in contact with me. I can show you how to do it. It's quite easy, quite quick. It doesn't take a lot of technical expertise. If you can manage Microsoft Word or your phone, you can record a conference and edit it, and it's not a big thing. So please get in contact if you're interested.
There you go. All right. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question in a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
See ya.
Now it's just random numbers. Stephen, wasn't 88 the Scottish one, I think, last time?
Bye.
Something like that.
Now it's 865. This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.